Good morning. This is Leo. Today I want to talk about a very sensitive subject that most business owners don't want to talk about. And that's with coaching. Most people don't believe in coaching, other people believe in coaching. Anthony Robbins is famous for saying, imagine who you could be with a great coach. Think about Olympic athletes. How well would they do without coaching? Think about Microsoft. Think about, American Express, think about Amazon, think about any major company, they have advisors behind them. But we're not here to talk about, the major players. We're here to talk about your business. Whenever we ask anyone, we usually ask this question on LinkedIn quite a bit. Who are your advisors, and or do you have advisors? And the response is always almost 100% of the time, yes, we have freaking amazing advisors. My advisor owns a $20 million company. He drives Ferraris, he drives this, he drives that. He's doing amazing work. Now that's all well and good if the statistic didn't exist that 96% of companies fail. And what we've been doing for the past 39 years is flying around all over North America. We average 5 flights a week, analyzing or dissecting companies. We look at financials, we talk to key people, we look at marketing strategies, policy procedure manuals. I mean, we look at everything. And most companies that believe are doing well, 52% of those companies are within weeks or months of bankruptcy. Because let's look at that. If a company's been in business for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and there are one or two late invoices from bankruptcy, is that a good position to be in? Or if after 10 years or 5 years of being in business, you still operate with a line of credit, I mean, if you don't have your own internal funds, I mean, you know what you need to operate your company. If you're still using a line of credit, you're one of those companies that I'm referring to. Anyways, that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about analysis. We're talking about advisors, sorry. So if you're getting advice from one of those companies that are within weeks or months of bankruptcy, are you sure you want to be following their advice? Okay. So here's problem number one. Problem number one is when we do a forensic analysis, we spend 3 days with that company, and we always ask the question, either before we fly in or during the conversations that we have with the management team, and we always ask, what do you think the problem is? And we always are given a list, because a company doesn't accept us coming in unless they have a specific problem they want to fix. So of course, we write that problem down, and at the end of the 3-day analysis, 100% of the time, the business owners agreed what they thought was the problem was a different problem. So that's problem number one. If we don't know what the problem is, how can we communicate that problem to our advisors, right? So problem number two is the communicating, or our interpretation of our problem is not the right problem. But let's assume that it was. Now we need to interpret our problem and convince our advisors what our problem is. Now, we have what we call history filters. History filters are our own biases, our own limiting beliefs, our own, we might say, an example might be, well, social media doesn't work for my company. Or if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself. Or there are no good tradespeople left. Or trades are a dying art, or whatever your limiting belief is. Or you might say the economy is bad, or the last time I tried that, it doesn't work, so it doesn't work for my company. Those are either limiting beliefs or history filters. And history filters is the equivalent of looking through, what a shower tube looks like, a tube that hangs your shower curtain. That's like looking at, your future through a shower tube or your history filter because it taints everything. So every time we read a book, let's say 1,000 people read the same book, you're going to have 1,000 interpretations of that same book, right? So we interpret conversations, books, histories, videos. You're interpreting this video based on your history filter and what your limiting beliefs are. So when you're trying to interpret your problem to your advisors, you're doing that through your history filter. Now, your advisors listening to you interpret your problem are listening through it through their history filters, right? With their successes, their failures, and so on. So now they're formulating their advice. So now they're giving you their advice, and their advice to you is being interpreted or reinterpreted through your history filter. Okay? So, and there lies the problem. Now, let me explain in more detail. I'll share a case study with you. We went to analyze a particular company, and and this is one of my biggest failures. If you've watched my videos before, you've heard this story before. But what I want to focus on this case study is how long it took us to understand what his problems were. Yes, we had a pretty good idea of what the problem was in the first 3 days. But it was not the core issue. We thought the core issue that the company didn't understand their overhead burden, and of course they were losing money on every project. But what the problem was, and we found this out 11 months later, was that the owner of the company was unknowingly sabotaging his own company. So if it took us 11 months every day within the company, and I was actually hired as an interim president, so I spent, countless hours, not only with the owner and with key people and interviewing every employee and looking at financials every single day because this company was in crisis, and we were doing cash flow projections daily, and it still took us 11 months of following the CEO and following key people around to find out why we had a discrepancy. The employees are saying this, management is saying this. How can it be a discrepancy that bad? And each time we spoke with the employees, they confirmed this. Each time we looked at financials, it confirmed what the employees were saying. So how could the management be so out of touch? Right? And that's why we said, well, we got to get deeper. This is why we started following people around and trying to figure out what the problem was. So what I'm trying to say is, if your advisors don't know your key people, don't look at your financials on a daily or weekly or monthly basis, are they giving you the right advice? And the other problem is that, going back to the forensic analysis, most business owners believe they have a problem. They can't find quality people. They can't find tradespeople. The economy is bad. There's a virus. Um, you know, uh, my clients treat me like shit, or whatever the problem is. That's the equivalent of the guy on TV with the spinning plates with it on pool cues. And each time we focus on the symptom, because those are not problems, those are all symptoms of problems. And each time we focus on the symptom, we're actually creating other symptoms. So and the reason why it takes generally 20 to 40 years for a general contractor to get to $20 million is because they focus on symptoms, or they focus on doing things by trial and error, which is another symptom, right? So if you keep focusing on symptoms and you keep creating other symptoms, you've never solved the root cause of the problem. And that's why it takes 20 to 40 years or 2 or 3 generations to get to $20 million. That same general contractor with the right tools, focusing on the right strategies and the right business blueprint and the other 33 tools, can get to $20 million in 3 to 7 years. Okay. So, and there's a 96% failure rate in the construction industry, in the renovation industry, and yet the renovation industry has been proven to be the most profitable industry consistently since 1920. So how can that be, right? And if you were to interview, and we have interviewed a lot of companies that went bankrupt last year, and yes, they had advisors, and yes, they had some great advisors, right? So why did they go bankrupt? So ask yourself that question. If you don't have an advisor, that's a huge issue because you're not talking about your problems. Even the sheer act of talking about your problems can a lot of times give you the solutions that you need. If you're too busy working with your hands, uh, or you're working with a computer, or you're working on marketing, or you're working on whatever you shouldn't be working on, if you're doing your employees' work, who's doing your work, your CEO's work? Right? Who's the visionary? Who's seeing your company from a helicopter perspective? Okay. So let's get back on track. Your advisors and not everyone seems to have this false sense of security because they have advisors, they have great information, they're working on the best advice. But how do you know that your advisors are not going bankrupt? How do you know that they are truly successful? If you haven't looked at their financials, how do you know they're giving you the advice you need? And how do you know they're interpreting your problem in the right way? Because if 100% of the clients that thought they had told us what the problem was admitted 3 days later that what they thought was a problem was not the problem, then how do you know you're conveying the right information? How do you know you're working with the right problems? How do you know you're actually working on the right problem? I know this is a difficult subject. It has to go beyond your ego, but I would love to hear your comments below. Even if you had an advisor look at your plans for 10 seconds, that's still better than not having anyone look at it. I mean, look at it from, a construction building perspective. When you have an engineer stamp on that house, or that I-beam, you feel more comfortable, even though the engineer might have looked at it and say, yeah, that makes sense. Even though he may have not done the calculations, or the engineer done the calculations on the Empire State Building I-beams, it's still better than not having any opinion at all. So again, please post your questions, comments below. I would love to hear your comments on this. Thank you. Talk to you soon.